You're really painting this picture here of the IRS that's really poorly run. So why was this audit not rigorous? Do you think incompetence is to blame, or is this the fault of former President Trump?
We don't know. To give you a little context that actually involves Forbes, while Trump was running for office, Charles Rettig, who was a contributor to Forbes, wrote a column on Forbes that said, if I were his lawyer, I would tell him not to disclose his returns because he, being rich and having all these, entities, is probably undergoing one of these horribly invasive high wealth audits with all these experts auditing him. And lo and behold, he got appointed IRS commissioner. Now, you could say, well, what about that really intensive audit you thought he was supposed to be undergoing? Why didn't that happen, Mr. Rettig? Ironically, towards the end of his term, which just ended recently, under the Biden administration, he has been adamant that the IRS needed all this money the Democrats gave them last year, and that the IRS is totally outgunned. And I believe him that the IRS, when it comes to auditing rich people, is totally outgunned and outmanned. But the question is here, did they decide they weren't even going to use those guns they had because he was the president? We don't know. And we also don't know, there was this delay of turning over the returns, which is really quite important to understand here, because there is a part of the law that says that the IRS is supposed to turn over returns if the Joint Tax Committee and the Ways and Means has a legitimate reason to look at them for legislative purposes. And they sent the request to Rettig. He sent it to his boss at Treasury. Treasury said, we're not giving you the returns. And it then took 3 years of court battles, which is why the committee only after the Supreme Court finally turned down the last appeal, got these returns, 6 years of Trump's returns. They got them last month. Now, you could argue it's invasive of them. They are going to release his returns. They haven't done it yet. What they've released so far is a report on how they think that these audits need to be reformed so that they become more rigorous and automatic, and a summary of what was found in the tax returns and the audits of the returns. And the Joint Tax Committee said, look, none of these audits are closed yet. We can't say if the IRS had looked at all these items we think they should have looked at, whether Trump would owe more taxes. We can't tell you that. We're just telling you that they didn't look at these items. Things like huge, questionable charitable deductions for land donations. Now, what happened was eventually the IRS started looking at more items. First, they were embarrassed, I think, by the New York Times report in September 2020. And the New York Times had gotten 15 years of his returns, or 17 years. And they had a big meeting and they said, maybe we should look at this issue. Well, maybe not. We should look at this issue. Literally using a New York Times report, which granted won a Pulitzer, but these are reporters to decide what to look into. And then they really did ramp up, it looks like, some of the investigation after President Trump lost re-election. I mean, I can't tell you if that was the reason or whether the New York Times was the reason, but certainly the delay in auditing him, the delay in turning over the returns, and then the lame approach they took to the audits to begin with has got to raise some eyebrows.
Who do you think that this report looks worse for, the IRS or former President Trump?
Well, from the point of view of what new we learned, the IRS. We know that President Trump did not like paying taxes, that he was very aggressive in his tax practices. And as he pointed out, that makes him look smart, and some of his followers probably believe that. But now we are seeing the IRS at either even more dysfunctional than we realized, or just cowed, which is possible. But it certainly suggests that what we assume was going on in the way of presidential audits all these years has not been going on. And that the tradition of releasing returns, and Mitt Romney released a huge long return when he ran. That tradition is a very good one because it lets us all look at the returns in real time, and therefore, issues are flagged, and the IRS presumably would take on issues if they existed, just like the IRS seems to have responded to the New York Times reporting. So it doesn't look good for the IRS, and it's just a very sad chapter in their history.
You said President Trump doesn't like paying taxes, and he's had these aggressive tactics when doing so. Is this illegal?
Well, I'm going to have to leave that to the lawyers. I mean, there's obviously, there's civil penalties you could face for taking various aggressive positions. We don't know. What we do know is that many years of Trump's tax returns the audits are not closed, and that none of these 6 years are closed. So when does aggressive go over the line to abusive and then to illegal? You'd have to be a tax lawyer to decide. And then, of course, there are various prosecutors looking at issues related to his taxes in New York. So we just don't know. We know he's aggressive. We know that some of the charitable claims he made and deductions he took were very questionable. We know that there are issues about the way he is passing wealth and maybe paying his children. There are all sorts of issues there. But, there's a big wide world that goes from Joe taxpayer, has a salary, pays everything he owes, doesn't itemize. His only tax shelter is his 401k, to your normal, multimillionaire, billionaire who likes to play it safe and takes everything he thinks he really legitimately can, to perhaps the world of businessmen like Donald Trump, who are as aggressive in their tax filing as they are, and maybe as creative in their tax filing as they are in other parts of their financial dealings.